Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mike Ayalon. I am the CEO of Greek University. Today, we have for you a great program. It is called Healing Together, Navigating Post-Election Stress and Uplifting Our Students. And we are here with mental health expert Brittany Richmond, as well as the executive director of Half a Sorrow Foundation, Dennis Gillan. We are going to discuss today how we can manage our personal and professional stress, how we can uplift our students in a very divisive climate, how we can build campus resilience, how we can implement effective self-care, as well as long-term mental health planning and resources for your campus. So I'm going to start out by introducing our panelists today. Our first panelist is Brittany Richmond. She is a dynamic and charismatic mental health expert with over a decade of experience. Diagnosed with multiple anxiety disorders, including an impulse control disorder, right after high school, she was inspired to enter the fields of counseling and psychology. Brittany has since dedicated herself to ending the stigma surrounding mental health and reaching out to as many struggling young people as possible with her story and her voice. Brittany is a highly sought after, emotionally engaging mental health speaker, one of the few active women in the youth market. She has spoken on prestigious youth leadership stages nationwide, delivering her empowering message, Become an Overcomer. Recently, she was honored with the 2024 Voice for Positive Change Award from the Illinois Association for Behavioral Health and Operation Snowball LLC. And she's got her debut book. It's called Lies My Anxiety Has Told Me, became a best-selling book. She has a psychology degree from Western Illinois University, where she joined Chi Omega, and she also earned a master's degree from Walden University in psychology. So, welcome, Brittany. And next up, we have Dennis Gillan. He is a national thought leader on the topic of suicide prevention and mental health advocacy. Unfortunately, he has been deeply touched by suicide after the loss of both of his brothers to suicide 11 years apart. He has worked on the suicide prevention hotline. He's an author, he's a TEDx speaker, but his real calling is helping to improve mental health by promoting real conversations. Dennis is the executive director of a nonprofit called the Half a Sorrow Foundation. His keynote talks definitely promote real conversations, and he combines his losses with real world solutions and even some laughter. Dennis is a lifelong member of Phi Sigma Kappa fraternity. Welcome, Dennis. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So, Brittany, let's start off this conversation here with you. Obviously, we have a very polarized nation at this moment. I just saw earlier today we had President-elect Trump ended up coming over to the White House and spending some time with President Joe Biden. Certainly, it's good, I think, for our country to see some form of healing, to see that peaceful transition of power from one president to the next. But, the student affairs professionals are certainly going to be conflicted right now. I think they're dealing with their own stress and anxiety. And I also think that they are feeling overwhelmed by the students' emotional needs. So the question is, how can they manage both their own stress and anxiety, but also not feel overwhelmed by their students?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and hello, everybody. So honored and grateful to be here to support all of you in this time. And I want to just point out that I feel like every question we're going to ask today could be relatable to any other situation also that can cause stress or anxiety, not just the election. It just happens to be that this is the thing at the forefront of everybody's mind right now. So I just want to say that anything that we say today, and I'm sure, don't want to speak for Dennis, but I'm sure it's true, that everything can be applied to other aspects of life that can be stressful. But yes, I mean, the old adage of you can't pour from an empty cup is a thing for a reason, but there's a lot of different ways that you can manage your own, overwhelm and anxiety in this process while supporting other people. And I think the first thing is just to be aware of your bandwidth, be aware of your ability and capacity, and if you are qualified to handle this. And we'll get further into what that could look like if there were more serious issues going on. A part like with anxiety becomes very deliberate, but you can utilize self-care, peer support, I think is really important, like other people in the same role or positions as you. Organizational support, I think, is really important. And then practices like self-practices and self-growth. But the one thing I really wanted to point out, and I'm excited to hear Dennis's take on this too, is boundaries with compassion. I think that is so critical and something that we don't often do. Boundaries are really hard in general, let alone when we're in positions where we want to help and serve. But we also have to realize that we are human beings as well. And I think that while helping students, and I took notes, so if you see me look over here, it's because I'm reading my notes. It's important to establish limits to prevent not only burnout, but also, like I said, recognize your own bandwidth with this emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, all the things, and respecting yourself also. But boundaries can include setting times where you can support students, right? This is the time of day where I have the capacity and bandwidth to support you. And then setting clear expectations around that and the supporting roles you have. But time to disconnect also, because compassionate boundaries allow people in professional positions to give and serve without overextending themselves. And I think that's really important. So that's what I really wanted to encourage people to do, is to set the boundaries with compassion. So
I love it. Really great stuff. And certainly I'm trying to do that myself as well. Just thinking about my schedule every morning, making sure that I have my workout time for an hour every morning to myself. I'm usually just, thinking about the day ahead, what I need to get done, but also getting a workout in as well. And it's just worked out really well for me. And that's my everyday ritual, right? We talk about ritual in our fraternities and sororities, but that's what I need in order to have that balance in my life. Now, Dennis, tell us, what are some practical strategies that we can use to separate personal feelings about the election from professional responsibilities when you're actively advising students?
That's a great question. You come from a neutral basis. The election happened. There's 50% of the country right now is ecstatic. The other 50% is not. But the majority of us had some angst over this election. You almost say 100% of us had some kind of election anxiety. So we're all in this together. First of all, it's over with. It's done. And I did not, yeah, everyone clap, clap. I did not live in a swing state, but my friends that lived in swing states are so happy that they won't get bombarded with commercials. It was they had an onslaught. It was brutal to your psyche. And to Brittany's point earlier, the boundaries. I just listened to a podcast. Was this guy was talking about this big donut, like this is what's going on in the world, and the little hole in the middle. It's like this is what you control, this little part. So I have to focus on that. And even in your professional dealings, what can I control? And this whole election cycle got me thinking about my life. Like I took a retrospective look back, and I said, wow, how many presidents have been in office since I've been alive? And you can tell by the white beard, I'm doing that no shave Movember thing for men's mental health. It's white because I'm old. And I came into this world, and a month later, the president was assassinated. That happened. That that happened. And that's how I was introduced to this whole thing. A month later, he's gone. And I'm counting right here. I'm looking at my notes, like Brittany said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm going on my 13th president. And the boundary for me to be set, and the professional, aspect of this is, I think the man in the mirror has more say in my life than the person in the Oval Office. And I have to just keep repeating that to myself. The guy I look at when I'm brushing my teeth has a bigger part, like your ritual, Mike, has a bigger part in my day than whoever's sitting in the White House. So I'm really working on that. And this has been a good exercise to come and do this today, because it got me thinking about how many people are in office and how much did it impact my life? Sure, a lot. There was, I had to sign up for selective service when I was growing up, because the president enacted that. It does impact you. There's women right now worried about reproductive rights. That will impact you. I get it. I get it. So we have to figure out what we can do with um, this particular stressor. And I think Brittany nailed it. This is one of many stressors in our life. How do we handle this one? And how do we make sure that we're there for our students? So great question. I hope I answered it, but it's one of many stresses we have, and we just have to figure out how we're going to cope with this one.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a gret answer, actually. And it's interesting. I'm a news junkie. Anybody who knows me really well understands that. And even, after this election, my wife and I will usually watch TV together. And she just looked at me after the election, and she said, would it be okay if we just watch some different things for a little while? And I was like, of course. I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, and so I had to recognize that this was, clearly going to be impacting the psyche of my wife. And so in order for us to have a happy marriage, yeah, I mean, I got to pay attention to this kind of stuff. And it starts with me and ultimately what we can control. And I think, looking at the messages that we're receiving every day, we can control that, right? We can think about what are we doing with our free time? Are we reading a book that's constructive, that is going to enable us to make an impact? Or are we just receiving messages that are going to be hurting us in some way? So I think that that's certainly a part of managing that stress. And Brittany, kind of coming back to you, I want to talk about how we can support students in this divisive climate that we have on campuses. What approaches can student affairs professionals take in order to create an inclusive, safe environment where students who have different political beliefs feel like they are respected and they feel like they're heard?
That's a loaded question. A lot of these questions are loaded, but that's why I took notes. I was like, I kind of like made the notes and then left and then like came back to it when things came. But I think one of the, at least I have two different things in my life. I was a counselor for many years, so I was thinking about being a counselor, and I had this conversation with my husband. I was like, because he's a teacher and he has to deal a lot with like, the day after the election, all the kids are coming in, like some are happy, some are sad. And at least part of my training as a counselor was remaining neutral, in whatever conversation that I'm having with a client or a patient. And I think modeling neutrality, is that a word? Modeling neutrality is really important, and it's a skill that needs to be worked on. So give yourself grace in this process. And I think that there is a way to create space and hold space for other people. And we've been tricked into believing in that we have to fully understand how people feel in order to help them or support them, and that is untrue. We don't have to understand how you feel to support you. And a lot of times when you just give people the space to talk about how they feel or what they're going through, that's enough. Like it is enough to satisfy like their psyche, as Dennis said, right? And I think that modeling neutrality as a student affairs professional, or really just in any role that we have, can demonstrate the inclusive behaviors that we seek to see. And another thing I wrote down was, and this is the speaker in me from my speaker training, I was thinking about storytelling. And I was like, we should encourage storytelling over debating. And what I mean by that is when people start to become very heightened emotionally, we hear people argue about the policies within politics, right? But we don't often hear about their personal experience into why that policy is a connector to them emotionally. So I think when we encourage storytelling to increase empathy, then that creates more understanding. Because again, I want to really lean on like you can create empathy and hold space without changing your political view and without, fully being like, yes, I understand and accept what you're saying. That's not what we're saying. We're saying, how can you let someone unburden themselves so they feel seen in this process? So those are the little things I would say.
Yeah. And Dennis, when I look on college campuses and I look at some of the reactions that I'm seeing among students, I think there are two that kind of stand out to me. One is the students are withdrawing. So that could be one reaction. Another one would be engaging in confrontational behaviors. So, how do we encourage the students rather than either one of those options? How do we encourage them to engage in something that we would call constructive dialogue?
That's a great question, Michael. And it's interesting because you said they're starting to withdraw. And that's one of the warning signs, too, for a mental health crisis or what I do, suicide prevention. If somebody's withdrawn or isolating, and if you think about how it pertains to Greek life, if someone stops showing up for chapter meetings, they're taking this really hard, you got to go out and get them because a stick alone can be broken by a child, but a stick in a bundle cannot be broken. And Greek life is a great bundle. So we got to bundle up and check on each other. The confrontational nature, it's a lashing out. I think about the Kubler-Ross. I'm going to refer to Brittany here. This is the 5 stages of grief, whatever it comes from. This was people that were dying, but she says denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Feel free to dive into it. Go through all those. Just acknowledge those feelings. Get in there. Let the grief do its work. Don't deny the grief. And then there's a guy named David Kessler. I got to see him speak this year, and he did some work with Elizabeth, I think, or Kubler-Ross, who came up with those 5 stages. He came up with a sixth stage. And this is where I'm going to challenge the audience. His sixth stage of grief was finding meaning in this. And that's the challenge for all of us is like, all right, either that was really good news for 50% or it was really bad news for the 48%. Well, however you get it, what is the meaning in all of this? And what am I going to do about it? And you mentioned the word confrontational. Nobody buys in an argument. Think about it. You ever go to buy a car and you get an argument with the sales rep? What do? You walk off the lot. You don't buy. You just get so mad you walk off. Nobody buys in an argument. So let's get the confrontation part out. It doesn't work. I'm not going to convince anybody by raising my voice and arm gestures and all this stuff that my point is correct. You're going to convince them with love. And so find meaning in that and have those open dialogues. I am very blessed with my fraternity brothers because I lean a certain way and a lot of them lean the other way. And I'm on this text chain and I went and go see a bunch of guys this summer. We had a reunion and I walked down at the table and they go, shh, here comes the liberal. Because mental health is my issue. That's my issue. I found meaning in the deaths of my brothers. I lobby for more mental health dollars. I don't care if it's a D, R, or I after your name. We need more mental health dollars, period. But it was kind of funny because they were picking on me a little bit at this reunion. Here comes the liberal. But what really, it didn't bother me because we all had a good time. What was there first was love. We love each other. And we can agree to disagree. We could sit over, a hot dog or hamburger and just talk about this stuff. And at the end of the weekend, I'm hugging every one of them. And we don't agree on on certain issues. But that's okay. I think we have to get back to that. I really hope that we heal after this. It was good to see what you mentioned earlier, Trump going to visit Biden today. That should have been done in 2020 as well. And we need that. There was a time when I was growing up, Ronald Reagan was president, and the Speaker of the House was Tip O'Neill. They went out and had a beer together. That did my heart. That did my heart well to see those two guys sitting at a bar having a beer, going, "All right, we need to talk." And I think that's what we all need to do in this dialogue: is just talk and take the temperature down a bit. Nobody buys in an argument. Let's stop arguing.
Yeah. I mean, this is really why I love fraternity and sorority for a couple of reasons. Number one, there are other members in your chapter that are going to be watching over you. So if you are retreating back to your room and you don't come out for a week, then I have eyes on that and I can raise the red flag and say, hey, we got a problem here. This person hasn't left the room in a week. Whereas if you're not in a fraternity or sorority, then maybe you don't have people that are looking after you in that way. But also, if you think about the genesis of fraternity and sorority, it all started with debate. That's what fraternity and sorority was all about, that we can debate the issues off campus and discuss whatever we want, whether the campus is okay with it or not. Think about the late 1800s. And basically, we can agree to disagree, but at the end of our debate, we're going to move forward united as one. That is the beauty of fraternity, and we should encourage those different opinions. So, Brittany, what are you thinking?
I, first of all, love all of that. Yes, it's so key. And I love the word confrontation. And because I feel like I'm like the person that's like, ooh, confrontation, let's do this. Like I get that way. But I wanted to add to that with that, this is also because I always think to myself, like, what is the learning opportunity here? Much like the sixth stage of grief, right? So I think the learning opportunity here for young people too is to normalize discomfort in dialogue. And what I mean by that is we have to build resiliency too. We can't let these, because like everything that we're seeing on social right now, everything on the news, like, and it is designed to create divisiveness. It is designed to elicit an emotional response. So you react a certain way. And I think just having that knowledge is really helpful, but normalizing the fact that you can be uncomfortable in a conversation. It's a natural part of growth and learning. Especially on complex issues, and emphasizing that a discomfortable conversation does not have to mean it's a confrontational conversation. And we don't have to avoid it either, because I believe that experience, not information, is the key to emotional growth and development. And I think that we have to give them those experiences of having those uncomfortable conversations so they can build that resiliency and tolerance. So.
Let's talk about spotting some of the warning signs of increased anxiety and stress. And Dennis mentioned one of them, which was retreating, right? We're going back to our dorm room. We're not coming out for a week. I mean, that's one sign. What are some of the other signs that a student may be struggling more seriously with post-election anxiety? And when should a student affairs professional step in order to offer more support?
Oh my gosh. The thing about anxiety and depression and things like that is it can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. I mean, the overall, when I typically talk to people, I'm like, if there is a drastic change in behavior where someone from the outside is going, this is unlike this person on a typical level, then that's something I'd be concerned about, like withdrawal or isolation or physical symptoms, right? You stopped eating, you have stomach issues, you're not sleeping, or you used to work out and now you don't, or irritability or decline in academic performance or not showing up to chapter or committing to the things that you've committed to, or feelings of hopelessness, right? Like that's a really big thing. But like for me, I can always tell my anxiety is high because the house is a disaster because I'm such a type A personality, but like nothing else, like if you didn't know that about me, so like just keeping an eye on those signs, and if they continue over a long period of time, I think is really important, because an emotional reaction is one thing, but if it persists is another. So I think it's important to step in when you notice, like I said, they're persistent. And I think that there's a way to step in through expressing concern, but also listening. So not offering advice, not trying to fix the problem. I think because a lot of times people are not receptive to those things. They don't want someone to fix it. They just want to talk about it and provide the resources if they're willing, right? Like especially on college campuses, there's some amazing mental health resources that people are often unaware that they have access to, and typically at a very low price point, if not for free, if you're a student. So I would always encourage professional support. It goes back to the first question you asked me, like when you're helping people, you have to recognize when it is above your pay grade. And what I mean by that is like, this is not something I'm qualified to help this person with, but I know somebody who is. So that's a really good sign of a leader, in my opinion, is when you're able to provide the resources necessary to help this person. So that's what I would say.
Very helpful. I like that. Now, I mean, there's a lot of coping mechanisms that are out there. I mean, for me, it's going to the gym, but it could be going for a walk, it could be yoga, it could be a million different things. Dennis, are there specific behaviors that suggest that a student would actually benefit from something that's a little bit more structured in terms of mental health resources? Like Brittany was talking about, seeing a mental health professional on a college campus at the counseling center. And if so, how should a student affairs professional actually address this sensitively to say, hey, I think we need something a little bit more structured than just going for a walk or going to the gym?
Great question, Michael. And it's kind of cool right now. And this is I'm very proud of the students these days because they're talking about mental health. Back in my day, it wasn't even talked about. My dad's generation, forget about it. They couldn't even say the word cancer. They would say it real low. Oh, she has cancer. They would say it like that. Like this generation is talking about it. And it's kind of cool as we go around to different chapters and seeing that some of these chapters have mental health gurus or czars or, almost at a fraternity cabinet level, that they're having these executive level, you know, offices dedicated to mental health, and it's that person's job to bring everybody up to speed on what's going on in mental health. So for a school administrator to say maybe it's time to go see the CAPS department, and CAPS is often counseling and psychological services, CAPS. That's a lot of schools have it. Brittany pointed out the low price point. It's in your tuition somewhere. You're paying for it. It's
Might as well use
your
it,
mom and
right?
dad. You might as well use it. And so it's not that difficult a conversation anymore. It really isn't. And maybe back when I was in school, say you're gonna go see the psychologist, like, oh, what's the matter? Estás loco? No, we don't talk like that anymore. Say, hey, I'll go with you. I'll walk you over. And I have concrete examples of fraternity guys who told me that a brother was in a downward spiral. I said, what'd you guys do? Oh, we walked him over to the CAPS department. They saved a guy's life because they did that, which is really cool. So this generation, I'm so proud of them. It's on the table. Mental health is on the table. It's a conversation we have. And I think that may explain in my little world that the 15 to 24-year-old suicide level went down in 2022. The most recent data went down, where in other age groups it went up. This group is willing to talk about this and never, ever, ever, ever give that up.
Yeah, I love that, walking over to the CAP Center with a fraternity brother or sorority sister that needs that help. I think that is huge, absolutely amazing. Now, Brittany, we should talk about resilience a little bit. I'm wondering how student affairs professionals can actually foster this sense of resilience and even optimism on campus, despite this intense emotional fallout that they're having after this divisive election.
Well, again, a loaded question. There's so many different ways, right? But like I was actually I remembered this from like back when I was in grad school. Something occurred during 9/11 called the 9/11 effect. And the 9/11 effect was right after 9/11 happened, you just saw an abundance of American flags on houses all over the country. Okay, like you just saw them. They were just went up. It was like a thing. And now you just don't see as many. And the effect of that is that over time, and I'm again just using verbiage here, over time the emotional response wears off, right? It just naturally does. And with that, and one of the things that I wrote down was highlight stories of resilience and adaptability. And what I mean by that is that really helping students understand that this is not unusual, this type of divisive. We've had other situations in history, other things in people's lives when things have happened. So it's important to look at those. And I always ask teenagers too, I'm like, you've made it through 100% of your bad days, right? Like you will continue to do that. So what did you do to get through that? So constantly reminding them of their own strength and how they can push through this. But I brought up the 9/11 effect because I think it's important to know that 6 months from now, I'm curious as to how much of a heightened emotional response we'll have at that point, because there's just so many things that a president can do, but on like a smaller level, it's like your day to day, like creating a sense of normality, like just going about your life is like the best possible thing you can do, right? Like that's literally just living your life like you normally did before, and then learning to adapt, because we have to put ourselves in those positions of whether we're faced with adversity or not, to build that resiliency. So like I said before, even uncomfortable conversations that build that resiliency. So it's a loaded question because there's a lot of different layers to it, but I think that really just living your life every day and just how you always have been, and just learning to grow and adapt with anything that comes your way.
That's great advice. I like that idea of showing the stories of resilience. I almost feel like there could be an area of the student union where we just showcase throughout history resilience. I mean, there's a million examples of it, but we actually have to see it, right? Show me the photo, show me the story about what's happening in this photo, so that way I get the sense that, oh, okay, this is just one moment in history of many, and there's been tons of resilience folks, over thousands of years, and here's how they dealt with it. I think that could be really helpful.
I think it's
Dennis,
important to note, sorry to cut you off,
yeah,
Michael. It's also like celebrating your small wins and the progress that you've made, right?
yeah,
Like having gratitude for where you are and where you're at, and recognizing that the good things that are in your life. Because I think we're just so overburdened with negativity that we don't see the positive, right? We don't see the good things in our life and the blessings that we have, and the gratitude that we should extend, because that really does elevate you. Because listen, like the grief stages, right? I'm so glad you brought that up, because I wrote that in my notes, and like that's very much what's happening for a lot of people, is they're moving through the stages of grief right now. And one of the things we talk about in psychology is you cannot get stuck in a stage. Like you have to move through the process, right? You have to move through this process. So I think that recognizing that too. So if you're in a position of anger or depression or whatever stage you're in, allow yourself to move through that, right? Like feel those feelings, and then continue to push through to the next stage, so you can, build that resiliency. So
I love it. Really good stuff. Now, Dennis, I have a question for you. In all of my research that I'm doing in my dissertation right now, I see that a shared sense of community is really important in terms of mental health. And that's another reason why I love fraternities and sororities. It's this shared sense of community. So, how can student affairs professionals help to rebuild this shared sense of community? Not everybody is in a fraternity or sorority or even involved in a student organization.
That's the key. You got to recruit more people to join in on these student organizations. And during my talk, normally it's Greek life or some student government. and they're already in some kind of organized thing. But I said, if you look at your student life, every college has a student life page, and it's all these clubs and organizations. And I say this with the blessing of every student administrator out there. I say, if you see if you see a club you'd like to start and it's not on that list, the university will back you up and you start it. You have to be that spark. And it's hard. I get it. There's introverts in the world. When I first joined this hiking club I went on, that was for my mental health. I had to go to this parking lot, meet these people I didn't know. It wasn't a fun start. I had to get out of my car and introduce myself. But that night I slept like a champ, because I was tired and I was grateful for getting out in nature. So these student administrators have to really recruit hard. They do have to recruit hard. And there's a sense of community. I watched that Netflix special on Blue Zones where people live longer. And almost every one of those, there was a community or social aspect that these people had. And I played tennis, and the guy said that the tennis players live, 9 years longer than most people. And that caught my eye. It was almost a throwaway line. So I did some research, and they do live longer, but it's not the exercise, because trust me, I play doubles. I don't even break a sweat some days. It's the community. It's the socialization. It's going to the net afterwards and talking and chatting. And if someone doesn't show up, we call them. So if I'm a student administrator and I'm looking at retention, student retention is a big issue now.
Yep.
I'm pushing everything I can at student life, every club you can. I'm recruiting as hard as I could to get these people involved. And, joining a fraternity was one of the best things I ever did. But I have two boys. One followed my lead and he joined a fraternity. The other guy did not join a fraternity. He joined the crew team, which I said, dude, that is like a fraternity. You're out there, you're doing stuff. You have a group of people that are counting on you to show up, because if you're not in the boat, you're not going to win. They're missing a guy. So whatever you got to do to get out, and it is work. The introverts of the world, look at me, look at my eyes. I get it. It's hard. It's hard. I'm watching you. It is hard, but it's so darn worth it in the end. It literally is a matter of life and death.
Yeah, really good stuff. We have some people in the audience with some comments. I know Bryce is saying he's old enough to remember the polarization around the Vietnam War, and it was a very divisive time, but obviously they were able to finally get past it. So we appreciate that. Tish Norman is in the house. Tish, let us know what you're thinking.
Hey, everybody, peace. I'm so glad to see you guys. It's been too long. Dennis, my man, how you doing? What's going on? I think it's critical. I think it's imperative that we have to call a duck a duck. And I'm not sure if this conversation is calling a duck a duck. Okay. If we're going to build muscle around becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, if we're going to get our confidence up in being able to talk about subjects that normally people would flee from, the only way to do that is to talk about the subjects that people flee from, that make them uncomfortable. And so I think it is incumbent upon the masses to really begin to understand the level of grief when we talk about half of the country is celebrating and half of the country is grieving. I don't know if the half that's even grieving understand the grieving in the grieving. The grief in the grieving, right? There are levels to it. And for Bryce, for Dennis, for myself, for all of us on here, I saw a clip, and it may have been on TikTok, maybe. It was a splice of the last, I don't know, maybe the last 6 decades of presidential debates. Kennedy, the Clinton, Gore, Kerry, Bush. I mean, it just Obama. It had the last 20 presidential debates, and they showed clips of the level of respect and decency that these opposing candidates had. and they said comments like, well, I don't agree with my opponent here, but I do agree with my opponent of his love for our country. You know, they would say comments like that.
Mhm.
I believe one of the griefs, and then I'll yield. I believe one of the level of deep-seated, I'm going to even say trauma, I don't know if I want to even say grief, that many people are feeling in this country is the level of decency and respect and unifying spirit that has been absent, and not just been absent, but has been accepted in the total opposite of what we've seen. There is no one that needs to say that there are many troubling aspects of this person who has now just made history in many ways of being elected, or as the president-elect, of someone who, if the other shoe was, if the coin was on the other side, if it were flipped, there would have been no way under God's green earth that anyone would have ever been elected in that position. So we have to talk about racism. We have to talk about misogyny. We have to talk about integrity and honesty. And those are things that we aren't talking about. And if we are talking about fraternity and sorority, if we are talking about religion and Christianity and being Christ-like, we have to understand that even in those institutions, racism and misogyny and ageism and sexism exists. It's a real thing. And so what I've understood about this younger generation is that they actually do want to talk about that stuff.
Mm.
They want to sit down and sit crisscross applesauce on the floor and talk about these issues, because guess what? They don't know. And they need to understand when uncle and when dad and when grandpa are sitting at the table telling jokes at the expense of Black people, women, brown people, people who are from other countries, people who have all kind of diverse ethnicities and diverse aspects about them. They need to know how to say something to dad. They need to know how to say something to uncle, and they need to know how to say something to their fraternity brother. So these are very delicate and sensitive topics that this country not only doesn't want to talk about, but the looming dark cloud of the erasure of a history that's not Black history, but it's American history. Those are troubling on many, many deep levels for millions of people. So if we're going to talk about it, y'all, let's talk about it. Let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not sugarcoat it, because Mike, to your point, yes, fraternities were created out of that socialization and wanting to debate and socialize out of the classroom. But that's not why all fraternities were created. That's why white male fraternities were created. So why were women fraternities, i.e. sororities, created? And then let's talk about how Black people could clean up the sorority house and the fraternity house and cook, but we couldn't join.
Mhm.
So let's talk about the genesis of Black Greek letter organizations and the level of hatred and racism that prohibited students who were enrolled in PWIs from joining. So I believe when we're ready to have more conversations like this and having amazing feedback from our panelists here, I think it's important for us to have a comprehensive understanding and comprehensive contribution of calling a duck a duck. My name's Tish Norman, and I approve this message.
Well, Tish got on her soapbox, which is great. I mean, I think what you're talking about could be easily another hour, 2 hours, 8 hours worth of programming, right? I mean, I think that's the issue is that unfortunately we only have an hour. So, it's trying to figure out how do we manage the scope of this thing so
Yeah.
that we can get the help to the people that need it in terms of their mental health, right?
Yeah.
But what you're talking about, is the bigger issue here of the United States of America and this experiment that we're trying to build. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when we talk about, the history of the Divine Nine, when we talk about the history of Black and brown fraternities and sororities in this country, the reason why they exist, and also, the Jewish fraternities, and sororities for that matter, it's that they weren't getting invitations to join the white fraternities and sororities, so they created their own. And so I think you're absolutely right. It's part of this bigger conversation, certainly on racism in the United States. And we can talk about misogyny and all of those issues, all huge issues. But I think trying to manage the scope of that thing is the most difficult part. But here's where I am encouraged. I am encouraged that the young people, like to your point, they want to talk about this. That's the beauty in all of it, is that Gen Z is here and they want to have the difficult conversations. I think, it could be the alumni, it could be, some of another generation that might not want to have some of those conversations. But from what I see, the young folks, they want to talk about this. And that's what I love. And that's why I love what we do, because they're not afraid of the difficult conversations. And I think the college campus is the perfect place for us to continue those conversations. But Dennis, Brittany, tell me, what do you think? Are we like not talking about the difficult part of all of this?
Well, there's an underlying tone here that we need to address. And I'm glad Tish jumped on there. Our differences. And when I was a young sales rep, I used to drive around. This is really old. I used to listen to AM radio. And there was a guy on there. His name was G. Gordon Liddy. He was Nixon's guy. If you're a political junkie, I'm going to go back to politics. He was a right wing Republican. And he used to have this guy on, Lanny Davis, who was a Clinton guy, who was as far left as can be. And it was kind of neat to watch these two guys on almost a weekly basis. They would get on and debate the issue of the day. Clinton was in office, so whatever Clinton did, they had two different perspectives of it and whatever the nation was. But at the end of the conversation, it was really cool. They were friends. And they would argue over these points. And then at the end of the conversation, all right, I'll see you Saturday. I'm coming over for the barbecue. And it was refreshing to see that. So we got to talk about the icky stuff that's out there and call a duck a duck. But in the end, we have to, like when I play tennis, we have to shake our opponent's hand at the net and walk off together. And I long for the day, we can do that. I think we're going the opposite direction now, some civility. There's a funny story. I got booted off Facebook for some reason. I lost my two-factor authentication. I didn't say anything controversial, but I wasn't in a rush to get back on there until the election was over. I really wasn't dying to get back on there. I'm like, you know what? I may sit this one out. And I've seen family members disown each other over this stuff. And I still think we got to figure out how to talk about this stuff, call a duck, and at the end of the day, go to the net and shake each other's hand. Whoever won, whoever lost. Let's go.
Dennis, you're right. But I think what we've all seen, everybody on this Zoom right now, had that election result turned out in a different way, do you think that the same decency and civility, as you said, would have been practiced by the person that didn't win? And not only that, but we saw what happened 4 years ago, and not just 4 years ago, but up every year since then, of not taking ownership that you actually didn't win the election. So when we talk about decency, respect, we talk about civility, it's almost like it's a thing of the past on the highest level of leadership in the world power source, which is America. That's troubling.
Mm-hmm. Extremely troubling. Hopefully the pendulum swings back. I think enough of us had enough of that stuff. And you're right. The discourse got to a new all-time low. And, no matter who you are, I think 330 million Americans said, all right, I'm done with this. And hopefully we return to civility. I brought up that example of those two guys. You can agree to disagree. In my little world, suicide prevention, one time I'm going to go political again. I saw Karl Rove, a Bush guy, and David Axelrod, a Clinton guy, Obama guy, on stage one time. And you know what they had in common? They both lost a parent to suicide. Mental health, for some reason, is this great unifier. I don't care if you're on the left or the right. When our mental health is so paramount to what we're doing, it's more important than our physical health in every aspect, in my mind, that it's a great unifier, and we got to continue to talk about that no matter what side you're on.
Yeah. Really good stuff. Really great conversation. I think Tish is making a great point. I mean, here we're talking about caring for one another. Really, at the end of the day, this whole program that we have here today is talking about caring for one another. But yet, if we can't model that civility, right, on the highest level, I mean, there is no higher level than President of the United States. If we can't model it on that level, then the question is, what are we doing? Right? Because young people are looking at that saying this is how we treat each other, or in some cases, don't treat each other the right way. So that's troubling. And I agree with Dennis. My hope is that we're going to get back to civility. That is my hope for the American people, because we do need to care for each other. I mean, that's really what brotherhood and sisterhood is all about. So Brittany, get us back to this long-term mental health planning and resources. Are there certain types of mental health resources or programs that student affairs professionals should consider implementing on their campus in order to support the students that are struggling right now beyond just this immediate post-election period?
Well, I wanted to go back to just a previous question right before that, when it says, what are some self-care strategies suited
Yeah.
for high stress roles?
Yeah.
And
What should we do?
well, I mean, it kind of ties into what you were saying. And so I kind of wanted to combine both the questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Combine both the questions. And something, I mean, it's a common question to ask yourself too, because I think like when we're very reactive as humans, like when we feel emotional, we tend to react, whether it's positive or negative. So I think just constantly asking ourselves, like, the behavior I'm engaging in, is it helping me or is it hurting me? And that goes for other people too. Like, is this helping or is this hurting? And I think when we feel very emotional, heightened emotionally, we tend to, again, we're human beings. So give yourself grace. We're flawed. We're not perfect. And we will make mistakes. But I think when we're feeling heightened emotionally, we tend to go into defensive or attack mode. And that's when conversations become very, directive and they can be very aggressive, and they're not constructive. And so they become non-curious. So there's no curious questions. It's very much like we said earlier, when we're having these uncomfortable conversations that we absolutely have to have on all kinds of levels, is we have to almost, disconnect from the emotional outcome of this conversation and realize that our whole goal is to not get this person to agree with me, but to foster a commonality and recognize where we have things in common, right? Because we are way more in common than we realize. But all of these pieces that have been so divisive, it's like, well, let's get down to the core and see what we can do. But I often ask people, is it healthy, and does it serve you? Like, does this move you forward spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, in your relationships? If the answer is no, it's not something you should be engaging in. There's really no gray area with a self-care practice. It's either it's healthy and it serves you, period. If you can't answer either of those two questions, it's probably not a positive behavior that's going to benefit you or the people around you in the long run. But to your other question, what types of resources, and I made a little list here, is the peer support is really important, because there is so much power in community, because isolation is where mental and emotional health struggles thrive, right? Like, Dennis, you know this too. Obviously, when we feel isolated, it feels like it has you, it's convinced us that we're alone in how we feel. And we are unique as individuals, but what we go through is not unique, right? And I think that that's really important to understand, is that other people do feel how you feel, and other people do seek to move forward. And I believe, like we said before, the election is the hot button issue right now. But the reality, most people sit right in the middle. I mean, we've got like these far left and far rights, right? But most people are right here with more commonalities than people realize, right? There's just one or two things that they tend to latch onto that pull them apart. But most people are right here. A bell curve is a thing for a reason. It's not just so I truly believe that again, the news is meant to create this division and emotional response, and you're only going to see the extremes of both sides. I feel like the majority of people definitely sit in the middle and want to have those conversations. The real issue is they don't know how to have those conversations. And that's something that Dennis talks about too, is how to have conversations. And that's something I do too, is how to create space and hold space for other people without the expectation that I'm going to convince you of my view or I'm going to change the way you feel. It's just to shake hands at the net too, also, and see each other as flawed, imperfect human beings, all with commonalities, right? And I think that those are so important. So with that is like the boundaries too, like we talked about. I think setting boundaries for yourself and others is really important. The peer support is so important. Limiting exposure to things that trigger you, I think is really important. So like you said, Dennis, like I was not in a rush to get on Facebook. Well, I think that the news and social media can be very divisive. It's designed, I keep saying that, it's designed to do that, to elicit an emotional response. So if it's something that is like, you find yourself so enthralled in and you're angry and aggressive and everything around you is, or you're just not happy, then we need to pull back on these things, right? We need to pull back on these things. And like I said before, living your life with a sense of normality, going about your day like you were before, like creating these routines, like you said, it's like you go to the gym every day. It's like just leaning into the things that bring you joy. And like I said, the healthy and the serving activities, right? Like, is this healthy and does it serve you? Because when we elevate ourselves, how we feel in here manifests on the outside, whether it's in our behavior or how we talk or, how we show up for other people, not just ourselves. So I just recognize to keep yourself mentally and emotionally well in that process. So
I love it. Dennis has some comments too. Go for it, Dennis.
No, Brittany just teed it up. I have a quote sitting in front of me. I wanted to get out this quote, and she teed it up perfectly. We aren't healing in order to handle trauma. We already know how to do that. We are healing in order to experience joy. She mentioned joy. I want to get back to joy. For half the nation, Tuesday was not a joyful day. And now we have to figure out our way back. But I know how to handle the traumas. I'm just going to let the grief do its work. That's where I am. Let the grief do its work. You're listening to a guy that buried two brothers to suicide 11 years apart, one while I was in college. Yeah, I sort of know a little bit about it now. Wish I didn't. I wish I was on here telling you how to win 6 Super Bowls, but Tom Brady's got that locked up. But here we go. So we're trying to get through this, and we're trying to get back to joy, and everybody should join us on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to Tish's point too, I was thinking about modeling behavior, right? She's talking about modeling behavior from the president on down to all the people in the United States of America. But the student affairs professionals who are listening right now, they're also basically a model, right, for the students on their campus. So I guess, Dennis, have you thought about how the student affairs professionals can actually model self-care themselves? So that way the students who see them say, "Oh, that's healthy behaviors. Let's model ourselves after that." How can student affairs professionals model that self-care? And also, how can they team up with, they're short on resources. So the question number two is, how can they access the resources in the counseling center on campus in order to have a structure for future events that happen that we can't even predict?
Exactly. And when you were talking about modeling behavior, I remember when my son was born, somebody gave me a poem that says, "A careful man I ought to be, a little man follows me." And it goes on after that, but it hit me hard. Like, this guy's watching me. So for every student administrative leader on the call, just be wary of the shadow you cast. You may think no one's looking at you. They are. So model those behaviors and live that way, like what you talked about, positive coping skills. If your students see you out pounding beers at the local bar, not a good look, not a good behavior to model, but model those positive behaviors. And then, Michael, you talked about resources, how a lot of people are strapped at the moment, and we get it. University budgets have been cut slash whatever, um, I would go to the community as well. You have resources on campus, but there's people right around your periphery that want to get in. On the college level for mental health, the JED Foundation, big. Active Minds is big. NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, they probably have a chapter near your campus. So I don't use, just my brain. I use all the brains around me. Mental Health America, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention always wants to do these campus walks. All this stuff is out there. So in an era of declining budgets, I'm looking outside the walls, and then I'm doing programs for both. I'm doing students and communities. I give in talks, and so probably Brittany yourself, Michael, where it was at a university, but guess what? The doors were wide open. The public was invited, and the public showed up. So I'm doing that as well, if I'm in their shoes.
I love the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for all of that. Brittany and I, we were talking about this book that I picked up recently. I started reading called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. So yeah, here's the copy of the book. Brittany's got it as well. Really a fascinating book. If you really want to understand mental health and what's happening today, I highly suggest you picking it up and reading it. I will say this in all fairness, and I like to show both sides of any debate. There is some debate within higher ed on whether or not, some of the stuff that Jonathan is talking about is accurate. I mean, there's real debate on that, and I think that that's a fair criticism, but I think we want to start the conversation. Again, going back to debate. I love debate. Someone's got to take a stance for us to investigate it further and really figure out, does this person have a good point of view or not? And if not, then let's show the research that shows otherwise. But in the book, I mean, he's talking about the first foundational harm. If you want to have mental health issues, the first foundational harm, social deprivation, right? So we're not around other people, right? The second foundational harm, sleep deprivation. All the college students right now are not getting enough sleep. Why? A lot of it has to do with their phones, certainly. There's other things going on too, but their phones are on all the time and they're going down this rabbit hole on TikTok. And then before you know it, it's 3:30 in the morning and they have to wake up at 6, right? So that happens. So sleep deprivation is number two. The third foundational harm is attention fragmentation. So essentially all of those notifications that you're getting on your phone every minute, that is essentially attention fragmentation, where you're getting hundreds of notifications per day, and meaning that they rarely have 5 or 10 minutes to think without an interruption. So that's number three. And then number four, the fourth foundational harm is addiction. So the addiction that we're having to our phones, to our devices. And if you want mental health problems, this is exactly how to do it. This is the blueprint. And this is exactly what's happening in our country today. What do you think about that, Brittany?
Oh gosh, well, I want to point out too in the book, yes, and I've seen all the people like kind of pushing back, but he does state in here he hopes to be proved wrong, right? He does say, prove me wrong, but this is what the data shows. And I'm a huge data junkie. It's the psychologist in me, right? Like I like to look at all the data. But I think like just to that point, like humbling ourselves in these conversations, right? Hey, I don't know everything. This is what I know. Can you fill in the gaps for me? Like that's a huge way to say, I'm trying to understand, I'm not saying I'm going to agree with you, but like, let me try and fill in some of these holes and let me fill in some holes for you. And like the willingness to have those conversations. But what I loved about this book is I actually looked at it last night with my husband because I told him I was coming on this call today. And I'm like, look at this part right here. It says, because right now there's a whole beginning chapter that says, shouldn't the generation be anxious now because of everything that's going on, right? Like life in general, like look at the world, look at the climate and the election being part of that. And but it was interesting is all the things he pulled, the data and the research, not just in America, but across countries, suggests there's no massive long-term mental health struggles that get tied to events over the last decade. Like it wasn't because of 9/11. It wasn't because of this. It wasn't because of this. Like I was in the 9/11 generation. I watched those planes go live into those buildings. And yeah, it's a very traumatic thing, but it didn't contribute to my anxiety and depression that I live with today. Right. Like, so what he's saying is that some of that, so saying things like, which I found very fascinating, right? It doesn't mean that not everybody won't have those ties, but he's saying sometimes these major events don't hold as much weight as people realize because I truly do believe because eventually these things do tend to wear off because people grow and change and their views change, their experiences change, life changes. and all the things. But what I do love about this is he directly ties everything to phone usage, right? Like phone usage, which, I mean, like I said, disconnecting from these things can have a huge benefit, but the addiction piece does come into play. So it's like something I talk about with like teachers and parents, and I just like to challenge mindsets, I like to challenge the way people think, and because I like to be challenged, right? I like to be challenged. So oftentimes I hear from parents and teachers is like, oh, like they're always on their phone, they're always doing this, or like they're having this problem, this problem. It's all tied to social media. And I'm like, but they're pointing fingers, right? It's like everyone wants to point fingers for all things. And it's like they're just adapting to a world that we created. So really the fingers go here, right? Like, so how can we meet them where they are and, make the choices to not put things in their hands and devices at a certain age and things like that to protect their mental and emotional health. But like he says in the book, this is a massive experiment that we're just kind of seeing the long-term effects play out to. And I still think like 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now, we're going to see differences, but I think we're doing well. But I recommend the book to everybody. It's not the gospel, so don't like put all your heart in it, but the data is very interesting, to draw those correlations too. So
Yeah, very convincing. And now I'm starting to feel like a bad parent because I gave my kid a phone, right?
not
And
meant to make you feel bad, but it's
I'm
just
like,
a
now I feel
reflection. It's just a
terrible.
reflection.
Dennis, what do you think about this?
I started, you recommended the book and I started listening to it. And I immediately felt guilt for buying my kids cell phones. I want to call them up, say, I'm so sorry I gave that to you. But we will persevere.
Yes.
We will persevere. We'll figure it out. More of Jonathan Haidt's word will get out there. I saw a school I spoke at. They did they took on the book, The Anxious Generation, and the kids read it, and then they presented it to the parents, and they did this whole like um, seminar on it, and the kids voted to have the cell phones taken out of school.
Love it.
They
Love it.
want it. They want it. They
Yeah.
benefit the most. That's where some of the most positive feedback's coming from is the kids saying, "Yeah, take the damn thing."
Yeah.
Distracting.
Yeah, I love it. I love those teachers that take the phones, they put it up in the front of the room, and then we can go on with our day and let's just enjoy our time together. I think it's a beautiful thing. You'll get the phone back at the end of the day. It's still going to be yours, but for the time we're here, we're going to spend it together and we're going to look at each other in the eye and have some real conversations back and forth. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Well, listen, this has been really helpful. So thank you so much to both of our panelists, Dennis Gillan, of course, and also Brittany Richmond. They are both available to come and speak on your campus. So definitely get a hold of us at Greek University if you'd like to see them on your campus and have some more conversations around mental health. Thank you so much, of course, to Tish Norman for talking about a duck being a duck. I think it's important for us to keep those conversations going. So certainly appreciate that. Tish is talking about high performance and graduation rates and low behavior issues. I think, obviously college campuses right now are looking at all of those things right now. Retention rates, graduation rates, all of those things I think are really critical. So I think this is a very timely conversation to have. So I certainly appreciate that. And thank you so much to Bryce as well, our friend from Sigma Phi Epsilon. We appreciate you being here so much. It is important for us to keep working on all of these issues. So thank you so much for what you do. And to our audience, thanks so much for joining us. If there's anything that we can do to help you at Greek University, be sure to reach out and we'll see you on the next webinar, whichever that is. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again.